Do the words free time or relaxation sound foreign to you? Perhaps you've been stuck in the office too long, battling cyber threats or worrying about the next strain of ransomware. Let Sophos help provide peace of mind 24/7, 365 with cybersecurity delivered as a service. Because we want you to get back to your weekends, family dinners, and everything in between. And you'll get there with Sophos. Visit securityweekly.com/Sophos to learn more. The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra, Fortra. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Follow us on Twitter for live stream reminders, highlighted clips, memes, and more. You can find us at Sec Weekly on most platforms, SEC Weekly. All right, for our final interview today, we're talking to Matt Johansen. He joins us to talk about the death of SAST, AppSec, and the traditional security practitioner. And yes, that is the mood I'm setting for this interview. It's all dead. We're done. Let's all become AI prompt engineers from here out. Currently, Matt is the principal security architect at Reddit. Previously, he was at Bank of America and Goldman Sachs, but he originally started out in vendor land at White Hat. He's done a lot of writing and speaking at InfoSec, but had to take a break while he was working for the man, and we're so glad to have him back sharing his thoughts with us. He just kicked off a new newsletter called Vulnerable You, which is what kind of made me want to have him on the show to talk about his thoughts behind what he's doing with that and thoughts on the state of InfoSec in general. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I like the tone that you're setting. Apparently, you've been reading some of the remarks I've been putting out.
I chose violence for this episode.
And yes, I am reemerging from my time working for the man. And yeah, long-time listener, first-time caller. Appreciate being here.
Is this really the first time you've been on a Security Weekly show?
Yes. Yeah. But yes, my very first InfoSec conference was ShmooCon. I think it was 4. Might have been ShmooCon 5 back in 2008. And Paul.com was all the rage. And I was looking for my Hack Naked t-shirt to wear today, but I couldn't find it. It probably has some vintage street cred at this point.
Very nice. Yeah. There's still a few of those floating around. And in fact, we still get asked for them. Had somebody at B-Sides Knoxville last year ask if we had some. We've got the stickers, but we didn't have the t-shirts. So trying to see if I can get Sam to send me some of those for this year's B-Sides Knoxville.
I always get weird looks in the grocery store when I wear mine out. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, I got to find it. It's probably worth a few bucks.
Depends on the situation, right? There's some shirts I only wear at hacker conferences. I've got several of those. So Matt, let's talk a little bit about I touched on your background a little bit in the intro, but you've been a blue teamer for a while, right?
Yeah, started as a red teamer, like you said, in vendor land. To go a little bit before White Hat, I was just a hired gun consultant, pen tester, flying in, hacking into what I could, giving a report of a picture of me standing in your data center where I wasn't supposed to be, and flying out, that kind of thing. And then yes, I got very specialized into AppSec, went over to White Hat. But yeah, post White Hat, I ran security for a fintech startup, which is what brought me here to Austin, Texas, where I still am. And yeah, I was, the first security employee. I was one of the first, 15 employees of the company total. And yeah, we were running production fintech product with user financial data in Kubernetes when it was in beta in 2015. And Golang and all sorts of stuff that I knew nothing about when I walked in the door. And really no one on earth knew a whole much about the security of these things if they didn't work at Google. So That was my intro to Blue Team for sure. And yeah, I've been on that side ever since. Goldman Sachs acquired the startup I was working at. That's what brought me there. Then I went over to Bank of America, ran all cloud and container security for them for a while, and then ran all their vuln management and remediation teams for them. And then yeah, now I'm at Reddit, helping design all the security stuff into Reddit. We're a pretty small team, so it's kind of back to the startup vibes.
Yeah, no, and I love the early hacker hipster vibes. You know, like doing talks on Kubernetes before it was cool. That's great.
It really was. Yeah, my first Kubernetes security talk was DevOps Days 2015, I think. And Kubernetes hadn't officially really won the battle for like Docker orchestration yet. It wasn't sure. There was talks also at that same conference about Mesosphere and Docker Swarm and all these kinds of things that, you know, people were still choosing what to use. Kubernetes is kind of the clear direction now. But it was kind of fun back then. If you followed the docs to get set up on Kubernetes back then, you wound up with something that was basically Swiss cheese. So yeah, there was a lot to talk about.
What do you feel about all of these startups now that are focused on Kubernetes and security and orchestration? I mean, I know of at least a half a dozen right now that are either, 0 to 6 months GA or even, just under a year. But they're almost like a dime a dozen right now.
Yeah, I agree. A few of them are doing some really cool stuff. I'm friends with a bunch of them. It's a small community, especially the ones that have been doing it, since 2015 when it came out. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff to do there, right? A lot of monitoring that is different than your natural monitoring of your normal cloud architecture. A lot of container specific things. I think a lot of those vendors popped up when Docker was exploding in popularity, and just doing a lot of the basics like scanning your image repository for vulnerabilities, things like that. It all got commoditized very quickly, right? A few of those got acquired very quickly, right? Like the Twistlocks and the Aquas and the Stack Rocks and they all got kind of sucked up pretty quickly, and a lot of that world got pretty commoditized. But yeah, the Kubernetes specific bit is obviously, exploding in popularity. There's a fair bit, but I just put it on my Twitter this week asking for examples of public breaches that we know that the initial vector of compromise had anything to do with Kubernetes. And there's not a whole lot, right? It's a really popular space to talk about defending. Obviously, I'm intimately invested in defending it. But we're not seeing a whole lot in terms of attackers utilizing that today. Not saying that we shouldn't focus on it, but really most of the incidents that are out there are crypto mining related, which honestly, crypto miners kind of, might be the tip of the spear in a lot of these public incidents anyway, right? But yeah, Kubernetes adds a layer of complexity to everything that touches it that even the actual engineers using it are struggling with. So never mind the actual attackers. Why add that much complexity when you can, still rely on some tried and true tactics that are still working just fine.
Right. Low-hanging fruit. I'm sure Kubernetes is going to be a soon coming frontier, but yeah, I mean, if you can phish somebody, why go through that level of effort to try to exploit their Kubernetes and their whole container environment?
Yeah, I agree. And there are ways that you can absolutely misconfigure it that would leave you pretty wide open, and it would be low-hanging fruit. But those things aren't super Kubernetes specific, and if they are, they can be caught by pretty trivial methods of scanning or architectural review or threat modeling or anything like that might catch some of those really easy misconfigs. But any of the more complicated stuff, we're just not seeing a whole lot of it in public breach data right now. At least that I was trying to drum up some responses on that. I got a few, but it's not super widespread. If you look at a lot of the attack reports today, it's ransomware stuff, drive-by downloads, and then phishing is still the lion's share of a lot of the public incidents that we hear about.
Everything seems to be Kubernetes or container adjacent, right? Like I know one happened fairly recently that was just an open Jenkins server, and maybe it was touching containers or something like that, but those weren't the component that got hacked.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some tools out there that are doing some cool stuff with like sidecars that really give you the visibility that you would need, that you would want on like your bare metal fleet as well, right? That you couldn't get unless you were kind of talking Kubernetes language, right? In terms of injecting into those overlay networks or into that container registry or whatever it is, right? So yeah, I'm not saying, hey, everyone hang it up, ignore it, but we're not seeing a whole lot of public breaches on that stuff today.
So where I want to go next, you kind of touched on it, and I think this is what led to us being on this podcast right now is breach transparency. Like having to reach out on Twitter and say, hey, has anybody seen a breach that's had, these different ingredients in them, where we've seen a breach happen this way. Like there's no real central place where you can go search through a bunch of breach postmortems and like look for different things, from any perspective, as a journalist or even from a defender, looking for examples of the kinds of things that you need to protect against, maybe to help you prioritize the work that you do. But yeah, I mean, it's so let's, what are your thoughts? Like, how do we, being on the blue team side, I'm just going to assume that you've probably worked through some breaches. Like, what has to happen for us to get those kinds of details, aside from, lawsuits forcing companies to turn over details, or, we in the case of Equifax, it was a House subcommittee. How do we move that forward?
Yeah. I'm glad we were kind of both chatting around this on Twitter and bumped into each other. And yeah, one of my more recent editions of my newsletter, I was talking about this, and yeah, really like the whole theme of what I'm hitting on with the new newsletter is like being more vulnerable publicly, being like best for the community and yourself, right? Is a lot of personal growth on your team, a lot of rising tides lift all boats kind of theme, right? And yeah, being public with a lot of failures and lessons learned is a huge part of that, right? I think one like kind of superpower we have in our industry about this is that a lot of regulations require a lot of the notification go out within a certain time, right? So if you are an entity that is covered by some regulation about user data, right? PCI, HIPAA, whatever it is, there is the kind of the stopwatch as soon as you know about the breach, that, okay, hit the stopwatch. We have, X number of hours or days to get some notification out to impacted customers, right? So that's pretty huge, and that does drive a lot of what we see already today, right? I think another bit that helps is ransomware being so prevalent, and how it's pretty easy to kind of tap into the threat intel of successful ransomware compromises, because those things all kind of phone home to known locations and start kind of calling out, right? Hey, this is breached with XYZ ransomware. So I think we learn about a lot of ransomware that way as well, just because of the nature of how those kinds of breaches actually work. Once you get beyond those kinds of spheres, the numbers start to dwindle of like who has to say what, right? I think the other bit that's going in our favor on like this discussion is you have CISOs actually facing legal repercussions for not disclosing certain bits of information, right? You've got the story of Uber's CISO that comes to mind most recently, right? Where actually, Sorry, what was that?
Joe Sullivan. Yep.
Yeah. And he actually, is in jail or serving some sort of legal repercussions. I'm not quite up to date on the details, but of either misreporting or not reporting, or they proved that he was, lied about something having to do with one of the Uber breaches over the last couple of years, right? So, okay, if I'm a CISO today, now I have a concrete example of, well, I better get this right. I better be clear, transparent, and fast, right, with some of these notifications. So I think that's all counting in our favor. As far as the rest of it, right? Hey, you're a privately held, not publicly traded, not held to some standard by some regulator body, and you're maybe not scared about legal repercussions for whatever reason, or companies that don't even have a CISO yet. There's still a ton of that, right? What does Wendy Nather call it? The security poverty line, right? Okay, yep. So you're a company below the security poverty line, right? I was having a conversation on Twitter last night talking about vuln management, and someone said, "Oh, well, that's a job for your vuln management team." And I said, "Well, there's a privilege of having a vuln management team, right? Well, there's a privilege of having a team that can do incident response and disclosure and stuff like that too. So there's a whole lot of organizations that just aren't staffed to do the right IR quickly enough. I mean, hell, Mandiant's made a whole business out of those people not having those in-house teams, right? So I think when it comes to those, that's what I'm kind of striving to do with some of the public education and vocalization that I'm doing around, hey, being more public with this stuff is not just good for everyone else who reads it. Like, this trend would be good for the community at large, right? We would build a more collective resilience to these things if we could do some collective lessons learned on a lot of these postmortems, right? Hey, something went down. We were public about what failed. All right, what can we learn from this, right? How can we tabletop this at my own org? How can I update my threat models based on what I'm seeing, right? Not to harp on Uber, it's been in the news lately. Okay, Uber's law firm got hacked. Okay, great. Well, what do I need to learn from this?
They have 3 breaches a year, so I mean, they say like this is literally a problem for me at work, because somebody will say, "Hey, could we discuss the in whatever blog post I'm writing or paper that I'm putting together?" I work in product marketing. They say, "Let's use the last year's Uber breach," and I have to say which one. There were 3.
Yeah, and now that's like the last 6 months, right? So
yeah, but I mean, you find that more and more, with companies that are very visible. Like literally the 2016 one that Joe Sullivan got prosecuted for how he handled it. They got access to over 100. This is one of the things we learned from the court transcripts, is that they got access to over 100,000 working GitHub logins. And then they threw that all in a spreadsheet and matched it up with the Alexa top 1 million and sorted it by most popular website. And Uber just came out on top. So paints a target on their back. And literally they're 999,000 other working logins that they didn't even bother with, which just kind of gives you an idea of the scale of the problem here. I feel like, which is almost a bit overwhelming that there's more low-hanging fruit than the attackers have time to take advantage of.
Yeah, you're seeing, I mean, any of the breaches that are actually broad in impact, right, where splash damage is more than, source code and whatever S3 buckets they got access to while they were in there. It's like, oh no, anything beyond that is you're looking at like organized teams of people, right? Because it takes a team to even know what to do with the access once you get it, right? And while you have it, right? Otherwise, if you're talking about 1 or 2 bad actors, there's only so much time they can run around and do stuff. That being said, even the 1 or 2 person threat actor shops are getting very quick when they are successful with what they're doing, right? So but But I know this because I am part of some communities that are very graciously sharing things that they learn from their incidents, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't know this. So that's kind of just harps to the point home of we really have to be doing this as a community more and more, right? And some of it takes trust, like building trust among the community, so people will share things with you that you're not going to go on a podcast and share the details of in full, right? And some of it just is the other way, right? The orgs need to be a little bit more willing to share the lessons learned in a sanitized way that all the lawyers are happy with and things like that, right? So
yeah, and it's interesting because we like how we the cultures, I guess, are so different, where Riot Games, they had a breach in January and have promised to be very transparent and release the details of that. Nobody's forcing them to do that. But then on the other hand, tomorrow in our news segment for ESW, I don't have it pulled up right now, but there's a story. It's basically saying, hey, a lot of organizations are trying to hide reporting the breaches at all. And what you were talking about before, you're talking about some of the regulation that's going to require people to announce breaches within a certain time frame. And those regulations don't even require you to go into the details. They just require you to report that you had a breach. And yeah, we've got two huge extremes here. One side where they're doing everything they can to not report it at all, which is very Streisand effect adjacent. And then on the other side, people openly sharing it. And then on yet a third, maybe I shouldn't have used size. There's from a third perspective, a lot of the breach details we get, like one of Uber's breaches last year, come straight from the attackers. You'll see VX Underground on Twitter, or just a journalist will go find the attackers and ask them, "Hey, how'd you do this? How did this intrusion work?" And they run you through the whole process. And that's why we're getting more details from the attacker than we are getting from our own side, it feels like.
Yeah, completely agree. Right. And it goes, this has been a long-standing topic of conversation in the bug hunting world, right? Where
disclosure,
responsible disclosure, right? We're back to this. This is a long conversation, right? The Google Project Zero people have been talking about this for a very long time, right? Where, okay, we let a vendor know about a bug, and that starts
clock.
a timer. Yep, that starts a 90-day clock that you have to at least work with the party disclosing, right? And this is popularized by Google. We used to joke.
And if Microsoft wants an extension, the answer is no.
Exactly, right? Especially if it's with Bard or something like that, right? Or vice versa on that case. But yeah, we used to joke about so there was responsible disclosure and then there was public disclosure, right? We used to joke about painful disclosure, right? Of okay, this vendor hasn't been really good with bug disclosures. We're gonna release one, in a slow drip every 60 days. I think the stats out of Adobe back in the day were, they published the stats of the cost to fix a bug that was discovered, A, in production, B, in deployment, and then C, public disclosure, and just the chart of how expensive it got when it was publicly disclosed. I said, oh, well, there's an idea. If you want to cause Adobe some financial pain, just every 60 days, do a public disclosure. It's it cost them $1 million in IR versus, $50,000 to fix something caught in the dev pipeline or something like that. Okay, that's painful disclosure now.
Yeah, which is why we all shifted left, right?
That's
that was that was the number one value prop and selling point there, right?
That's my CFP. That's my B-Sides Las Vegas CFP is, okay, we did it. Shift left, mission accomplished. Banner behind me, right? Now what? Exactly. Now what? We can get into that if you want, but yeah, that's it's a whole other topic I'm harping on right now.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Like we've had all these, and zero trust is one of those big pushes now, and like assume we get there, now what, so I think it's interesting to kind of think ahead of some of these trends and say, well, yeah, it's important, but it's not everything, right? Like it's not a panacea to solve everything. Getting to that goal.
There's two things. It's not everything, and then also, okay, great. I've seen a lot of success in shift left in ways that we couldn't have imagined 10 years ago when we were all beating our chest about it. Right? Is a lot of the stuff shifted so far left, it shifted out of security completely, and into a lot of these web frameworks that we're seeing pop up have a lot of this stuff just baked in. How much harder it is to code cross-site scripting in React versus what PHP was however many years ago, right? You actually have to like go around the built-in protections, and then, okay, now you've pushed something that's vulnerable to cross-site scripting, right? It still happens, obviously, right? It's still a problem. But these frameworks by default have a lot of security stuff built in that, in the past, you had to be specifically trained in secure development to avoid injection attack, SQL injection or cross-site scripting or something like that in PHP, right? You had to like do this special thing to not be vulnerable, right? Whereas that's not really the case anymore. And so that's had a lot of interesting impact, right? A whole lot of security people that were never really engineers. Okay, right. How do you add value now when the lion's share of your security controls are in a build pipeline or in a coding framework itself, or in a SaaS tool? Like, I mean, you set the stage at the beginning for this, right? Is okay, if it's in that, and if you're a security analyst who previously was, running scanners on prod and ingesting results and, whatever it is, interpreting results, and you never really worked in and around like a GitHub PR flow or with a build pipeline, you're going to have a hard time, right? If you can at least kind of work around some YAML, it's going to be really hard. Most of these security vendors that are coming out are pointed at the developer these days, which is what we preached for so long, is the security tools should be used and be developer friendly. It's like, well, we have a whole industry of people and a lot of them weren't developers, right?
Right. Yeah. Once we started automating infrastructure, I started giving a talk. I started seeing this trend when I was an industry analyst back at 451 and had a talk that I did quite a few times in 2015, 2016 called The Future of the Security Practitioner, because the writing was already on the wall that like the existing security professional was tomorrow's mainframer, and if you didn't understand, the new ways of doing things, you're going to be, and saying tomorrow's mainframer, it's not necessarily a negative thing. Like mainframes still exist, and you're guaranteed a job for life if you understand legacy environments very well, because they're not all going to go away. Certainly not in the short term. But like I remember Ryan Huber, when he was over at Slack, once telling me he'd rather hire a software engineer and teach them security than the other way around. And I think that for me, that kind of confirmed my thought there, that like if you don't know how to develop, if you don't have an engineer mindset and skill set, you're kind of going to miss the boat here. And the other thing that became clear was that just cloud DevOps, like the ditriad, like all these new ideas of how to run compute and workloads and stuff like that, they didn't intend to solve security problems. They just kind of, it was an unintended consequence that in search of resilience and performance, you also got security as a benefit out of that. I don't know if you saw this whole trend the same way.
Oh yeah, Ryan's our good friend. He used to crash at my house when he come to Austin, and he started that Slack job around the same time as I started that security job at the fintech startup that I was talking about, and we would work pretty closely in lockstep on a few things. So we're of the same mind on this, and yeah, I completely agree. And I've gotten into a lot of debates about this on Twitter of sharing Ryan's opinion, right? At this point, I like hiring engineers, or at least cloud like people that like infrastructure folks, cloud infrastructure folks, who are basically still engineers, right? But okay, say you're not like you're not developing, you're not pumping out code, but at least know their way around spinning things up in AWS, Terraform, all the Kubernetes stuff like we talked about at the top. I would definitely rather hire those people at this point, and teach them some security stuff, because a lot of them are kind of turning into security people already, right? Because of all of the preaching and evangelism and everything that we did over the last 10, 15 years about shifting left. Well, a lot of developers have had to learn what the heck was going on with all this security stuff, right? So
yeah, what you're hitting on there, does security become like part of a role that doesn't necessarily have security in the name for a lot of people?
I'm seeing that be talked about more from engineering managers than I ever was, right? Of, okay, what if we just embed into my team some of this responsibility? That being said, especially for like a publicly traded company, imagine saying you're a publicly traded company with no security team. Oh no, that's the developer's job, right? We don't have a CISO. I think it's going to be a hard cultural sell. I think who's going to really drive this decision, and who's going to drive probably a lot of decisions in our industry over the coming years. This is actually something that you and I were sitting next to each other when we heard our friend Robert Hansen postulate this, is that the cybersecurity insurance firms are going to dictate what a lot of the industry looks like in coming years, right? With whatever they're going to require, especially if you've had a breach, it's really hard to get covered again, right? If you use your cybersecurity insurance, it's really hard to continue to stay covered. So you're going to do what they say if you want a policy, right? So, okay, are they going to, which direction are they going to go? Are they going to go, hey, security is now embedded into your CTO's org? Or are they going to say, nope, we need a CISO, we need a dedicated security team. You can hire all the engineers you want, but we need people dedicated to security. That'll be interesting. I don't even know which way I'm leaning yet of like what I think is actually the best direction. I do know you need people whose full responsibility is security. Whether or not those people are embedded into engineering teams or not, I'd be interested to see some data as people try that out. I'm not hearing of a whole lot of people trying that at scale yet.
So let me throw something at you, to kind of help frame this, but yeah, I'm not sure either. I think the easy answer is it depends on the company, right? And what that company can handle culturally, because a few times every month I do advisory calls for enterprises, actually several times a week, but a few times every month. A lot of those calls that I take, a lot of them are on AI now, but still steadily over the years. A few of those calls every month are vulnerability management, not just vulnerability management, but it'll be a 30-plus-year-old company that has just run their first vulnerability scan ever. And we're not talking like application scans. We're talking like a network vulnerability scan of like an old school on-prem network. And I have to totally switch gears for it. Even though I have a few of them every month, I've kind of got notes that guide me through it. But they're kind of depressing conversations, because along with those, it's just like stepping in a time machine back 20 years. Like they've got all these stereotypes that have been disproven in security. They've got that Department of No mindset. They've got the, like the whole company, everything is set up. Like all the stuff like we feel like we fixed over the last 20 years still exists in so many companies. So, every time I see like, some bleeding edge products or, how Netflix is handling security or something like that, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, 20, 30 years ago still exists. I don't know how big a chunk of it is out there, but I think it's a pretty big chunk. So like how do you handle that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the biggest counter argument to. I mean, you started my intro with some of my more spicy threads that I've been putting out about Dast being dead, and which is a big thing for me to say as I started my career at White Hat, which was a major Dast and then later a SAST vendor, right? So obviously intimately familiar with the space. I don't see the space keeping up with a lot of the modern web frameworks, single page apps. If you're a Netflix of the world or something like that, you really don't have the giant web presence that like corpse of the .com era had, right? Go back to the Sony hack days that, all of a sudden budget showed up about InfoSec, right? In the, what was it, 2010, 11 PlayStation Network breach. And it was some website promoting some movie in Brazil that had a forum that had SQL injection, that had access to the prod database. That changed everything. Oh, okay, we got to scan everything. And DAS got really popular.
Yeah.
And like you said, and my claim about DAS being dead is definitely not true for the companies like you're talking about, right? There's a lot of the companies that, okay, we still have people in certain departments that spin up a brand new domain and a brand new website for every new project, or in Sony's case, it was movie. Every movie had a domain and a website, and every country had a thing and whatever, right? They had sprawling web presence, right? It's like, okay, I have tens of thousands of Java and PHP apps and .NET apps. Okay, you need Dast. You need something to find the low-hanging fruit across that footprint, right?
Yeah, all the time you see, like websites would get popped, and it would be like Microsoft Armenia or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. But that's not the way that things are moving, right? If you were to start a company today, you're going to have a website, right? Even if you're a large, like Netflix is a large company, they have Netflix, right? I'm sure Dast is very useful at Netflix. I'm not saying that they don't use it or whatever, right? But it's good in breadth. It's not good in depth, right? And so I think SAST is kind of having a moment, whereas SAST used to be really bad reputation, a lot of false positives. I mean, if you ran some of the old SaaS tools back in the day, you got, thousands of pages of stuff that you had to sift through, right? Whereas some of the modern tools are actually kind of nifty in your build pipeline, or even in your IDE, right? If you want to shift that far left, if we want to go a bit there, right? Some of these tools that are coming out are actually have been a lot better, a lot more useful in developers' hands, right? So yeah, I say all that to like kind of just lean towards your, like, yeah, there's still a whole lot of people out there that need to do it the way that we solved it 15 years ago, and maybe they're not doing it quite like that, right? Versus, the super high tech, modern way of doing things, right?
But I saw a couple of years ago, Jeremiah Grossman declared that SQL injection was dead for the same reason that you're saying, because in these newer frameworks, like it's handled, and same caveat, except for the legacy stuff. And that's when I get hung up on when I have these calls every couple of months. I'm like, man, there's a lot of legacy stuff out there. How big is that legacy piece? Are we saying this problem is solved for 80% of organizations out there, or are we saying it's solved for 20%? Like what is the split between legacy stuff out there and people who have who are running Angular and React and some of the newer stuff? In fact, like some of these frameworks we're talking about, like Angular and React, are old at this point. Like some of them are getting retired. So you have so many layers of legacy out there.
Angular's old. Angular ain't it anymore, right? It's a React, and React's been around long. It's running in prod everywhere. You got Next.js that people are trying to figure out now, and there's a whole bunch of trying to keep up with that, and that's always been kind of the game of like security, trying to keep up with it and being kind of yesterday's solution. But again, that's where the succeeding in shift left has succeeded, right? Is okay, React came out, it had a bunch of stuff baked in, right? So there's less for security to catch up about with that. Not to say that there aren't problems, not to say that you can't shoot yourself in the foot with some misconfigurations. And there are plenty of best practices about things that you can catch in your build pipeline with React apps and things like that. But it is a different ballgame than Java, .NET, or PHP, right?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your newsletter. Let's talk a little bit about Vulnerable You and what you're planning on with that. You already mentioned you've got you've submitted some talks for Hacker Summer Camp this year, and I've seen the newsletter. But you also mentioned like a YouTube channel and a podcast as well.
Yeah, it's all in its infancy, right? I don't have the production crew that you guys have here invited me today. Very impressive. And yeah, I mean, I think Paul.com was one of the first podcasts I'd ever listened to. So you've had over a decade to figure out some of this stuff, right? But yeah, with the newsletter, as you mentioned, I was working for the man for a while. They have big, scary armies of PR people and lawyers that don't really love their security people on stage talking about how they feel about things. And that's less so true for my current day job. Still, hey, represent yourself, not the company. And that's what I'm doing. Right. But a little bit less so, and encourage some community participation. And, I was submitting the talks for summer camp this year, and they ask, okay, can you link any of your old Black Hat talks if you've given a talk here before? And I go back into let me Google the YouTube, my name on YouTube, and I think I gave 4 Black Hat talks in 6 years, and then it just stopped. Right? It's like, oh, okay, that's when the Goldman acquisition happened, and I disappeared from public eye for a while. Right? So it's like, okay, 2011 to 2016 or so, I was on stage a whole lot, and then I haven't been since about 2016. I think that Kubernetes talk at DevApps Days and then LasCon was one of my later talks. I've done little spatterings here and there, but I shipped that one around for a little while because that was the startup pre-acquisition, so I was able to still do those talks. So yeah, I got back into it. I've had this itch, right? I used to be on the Liquid Matrix podcast. If anyone listening was Liquid Matrix fan, I was the token American on that Canadian.
Yeah.
Dave Lewis, James Arlen, Ben Shapiro. Yep. And me. And yeah, we did about 100 plus episodes. We did it for quite a while. And so obviously, this is something that I liked in my career, and I missed that part, flexing that muscle. As you can imagine, if that was taken away from you, I'm sure you probably would not go work somewhere that wouldn't let you do all the things that you do. And yeah, so I said, hey, I want to get back into this. And it seemed like blogging wasn't exactly the way to go. It seems like newsletters are kind of having a moment, and said, okay, let me try to grow my audience on a newsletter. And I've had a few friends like Daniel Miesler, who runs the Unsupervised Learning newsletter, has been kind of helping guide me a little bit and helping promote for my first a couple thousand subscribers and things like that, and trying to get back into taking Twitter a little bit more seriously, less pictures of my dinner and dog, and more postulating about vulnerability management and things like that. So, help to get back out there. And I really enjoy this part of things. So, Vulnerable You was a concept I came up with, the kind of the concept a while back. My wife actually happens to be more involved in the mental health space. And was a big Brene Brown fan. This is very out of the InfoSec niche here, but Brene Brown wrote a book about the power of vulnerability, and she calls herself a vulnerability researcher on stage. She has like a TED talk about it. And I've always found that kind of interesting, because I was like, wait, I'm a vulnerability researcher. And she's obviously talking about a different kind of vulnerability.
What was the name?
Brene Brown is the author, and the TED talk is The Power of Vulnerability, and I think there's a corresponding book. She's had a few books. She's got like an hour on Netflix that isn't like a stand-up hour. It's like an hour long, basically TED talk on Netflix. It's pretty unique in that regard. And yeah, she talks about this space, and she says she's a vulnerability researcher. And I said, hey, wait, me too. And it kind of got my wheels turning. And I've been pretty public about my own mental health journey and struggles. And I said, hey, me being public about my mental health journey and struggles is kind of a vulnerable thing to do, put myself out there about that. And so it kind of got my wheels turning about this. And so I've kind of dedicated this newsletter to the cross section of these two ideas of vulnerability, right? Security vulnerabilities and personal vulnerability, right? And the U is kind of just a play on vulnerable you, like you should be more vulnerable, and you are vulnerable, and your security posture has got vulnerabilities, but also you as university, right? So that's kind of the genesis of the newsletter. That's what I'm going for. And yeah, I think you DM me, said that you went back and read my archive of I think I'm up to number 7 posts, and you've got a bunch of questions, and see how fast I could talk. So I'm up for the challenge.
We got to a good chunk of it. We got through a good chunk of it. Good conversation. And I do have a link where you can subscribe to Vulnerable You. And you mentioned Daniel Miessler, and that's how I found out about your newsletter. Is his what is the name of his newsletter? It's
unsupervised learning. Yeah.
Term. Yeah. Unsupervised learning. Yeah. Just had a brain fart there, but yeah, link is there in the show notes. So subscribe.
Appreciate it.
To Matt.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing the talks. It's it's remarkable. Like I was listening to your you chat with Arsnake yesterday, and like the same words are leaving our mouths. It's always fun to talk with somebody who kind of sees this the same way.
Yeah, so that's where you got some of my hotter takes. Yes, I did go on Arsnake's new podcast, which is very interestingly not InfoSec focused. I think I'm one of the
it is
2 or 3 InfoSec people that have been on there. Jeremiah's been on there. Alex Romero has been on there. There's been a few, but mostly just like really interesting cross section of individuals have been on there. So, but that was about a 3-hour conversation. We got into some hot takes, and definitely talked about exactly what we talked about today about, where does security live? Is it an engineering function and things like that we talked about. Yeah. Robert's one of the smartest people, I think, in the industry. So I was happy to go on his show.
Yeah, and it was fun to get to interact with both you guys at LasCon. I'm really glad I got to make LasCon.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. That conference has stayed the exact same size and the exact same location for quite a while, which maybe some people would see as a negative. I think the organizers are doing that very purposefully. It puts off the same vibe every year. It is a very small vendor presence, a very large AppSec presence, and kind of a core staple of the same speakers that provide a lot of value. Arsnake being one of them. So
I'd highly recommend it. It was a great conference for me, and I always try and put on a good conference. We try and do the same thing with B-Sides Knoxville, where we try and have it in the same place, same size. Vibe is very important. That's the reason why we'll never go to a hotel. We don't want it to feel like just another conference. But
yeah, Austin being like a pretty hot cybersecurity town doesn't really have a whole lot in the ways of conferences. So LasCon is a good one. B-Sides Austin's coming up here soon. I've only been a few times. I've spoken out a few times. I'm not involved with the organization at all. There's a few other smaller ones around. I think SANS does like a DFIR summit that they've done in Austin a few times. But LasCon's definitely a staple.
Yep. Awesome. Good stuff. Matt, I'm so glad you got to join me today, and we got to have this conversation. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, have me back anytime. Like I said, long-time listener, first-time caller. So happy to chat. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. Delighted to have you on. Thanks to everybody who checked out today's episode. We will be back. Okay. This is a pre-record. I was going to say we're going to be back next week, and we will. But also hope you're enjoying your RSA. having a good RSA week, and we'll see you next time.